The story of Homecoming begins with Eddy. So, the first part is the thing that I didn't tell you that happened in last episode, but sort of an extra feature. It's something only Eddy and I really know, and later he would relate his version of it to the other Rangers. But he did find out some information um, while doing recon at Quentin's house. So, what he found was a whole bunch of hospital equipment. He found that Quentin hadn't been home. That was the first thing he did. I believe he actually enters the house by breaking into Quentin's room from the second floor to discover that the house had been virtually untouched, that the room was just a monument to the missing. Um, the second thing he found was that Quentin hadn't been home, but that there wasn't a home to be to. There were people there, people that loved Quentin, but it looked more like a hospital than a home. It came out in his day of recon that Quentin's family had a lot of medical bills happening, and that um, whatever Zedd had said to Quentin likely involved whatever was happening at home because there were rooms that were retrofitted, not recently, but definitely retrofitted to be like a hospital room, a place for a medical bed, a place with grab handles. Something had obviously happened here in the past, and it had kind of colored all of Quentin's interactions and all the things that the rest of the Rangers hadn't seen at home. The other thing about Eddy, besides his capacity to care and the way he missed Quentin, is that everybody else was really able to start thinking about their own future, and building a character with the player that played Eddy. I had kind of talked about this game, and in fact, my feelings about the Power Rangers as a whole, as about a coming of age narrative. It's about something that you don't necessarily do forever. There are obviously some Rangers that would disagree with me on that, some players, some GMs. Um, but I see this mainly as a stepping stone. I see power armor and weapons as an extension that helps you to move into the next phase of your life, helps you refine who you are under extreme duress. It's a bit more magical girl than it is Sentai, sure, or Takatsu, I guess. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I'm sorry, by the way. But for Eddy and for Jester, who played Eddy, there was this idea of not Eddy not really knowing where he's going, wherein everyone else sort of has some idea. Now, Cecily is pretty self-possessed, so Cecily could have really gone any direction in Cecily's interests. Being a ranger just seems like another eccentric part of her personality? And with her dress business, she easily could have stayed in Angel Grove and done that, or perhaps there's a version of Cecily that got right back on the road after graduation if she hadn't become a ranger and gone right back to the Ren Fair world. It's hard to say. Of course, um, Brick's destiny was really always a strong concept, if not really firm for him, that he was going to be a success, that, athletes always go far, is what they see. And even though I've made Angel Grove a kinder, gentler version of the American high school system, it still obviously favors an athlete like Brick. And of course, Jane has this scholarship, essentially a free ride um, to the school of her choice, and she'd chosen passion over practicality, which is not bad in my mind, in order to go to the Art Institute after winning the test. But for Eddy, it's sort of this unknown. And there's a small little conversation that Eddy gets to have with Mr. Kruger about this idea of the future. Um, and the conversation didn't get documented because it was just a little thing. But it's this idea of that Mr. Kruger, even in a metaphysical way, had always been thinking about his future, coming from having been a monk. And so the goal was to get Eddy to sort of think about a future where maybe he's no longer a Power Ranger. Maybe he's not necessarily grown out of it because he can always be called again, but maybe he's somewhere where being a Power Ranger doesn't make as much sense. Maybe he's passed along, the power to someone. Maybe something has happened to him where he doesn't can't wear the suit anymore, because that does happen to Rangers. I feel really emotional about these last couple episodes, by the way. The season two finale is very emotional to me, and both Homecoming with its reveals and Holding Out for a Hero, which is the two-part finale, took hours for us to put together. Um, and I'm really happy to share this with you. Um, I'm also really happy that even though Eddy doesn't know where he's going, that he has friends that care deeply for him. Um, there's a little sidebar here at the opening of the episode as I'm setting up the context of Homecoming. Now, Principal Kaplan does get on the intercom system and tells the students that instead of having a winter dance and a homecoming and essentially all the winter activities before um, before winter break comes in a couple of weeks, that because of the attack at the parade, um, all that stuff is getting rolled into one thing, maybe even Sadie Hawkins. So there becomes this flurry of activity at school. And in order to make sure things don't get too crazy, there's a corsage system where essentially you do a promposal, homecoming proposal to your partner of choice using a corsage or boutonniere system, as much as you'd like to. And it's a way to keep down on the wackiness. This is where Brick comes into the story. Brick comes into the story after a 6 a.m. chili cheese fried breakfast, waiting for the men's warehouse to open in the mall. The men's warehouse staff try to talk him out of getting a pink tux, but he does it anyways. It's a pink and white tux. Um, he's the only one to see what happens, too, is that Alpha records this wave of energy, this dark crimson wave of energy roaming around the streets, zooming like a flash style speedster would, right? And it doesn't seem to be doing anything diabolical, but considering everything, Alpha says, well, we're trying to stay on top of it. And all the Rangers that get up um, to the signal say, yeah, we'll keep a lookout. But Brick is already out and about. He already has plans to ask Jane to this dance. Um, Later in the day at lunch, a girl is going to come to the lunch table and ask about Eddy and give Eddy a corsage and a number, and it's going to be the number for the Wendy's hotline. It's actually a girl called Wendy with red pigtail hair, and it's meant to be a joke. It's meant to be a way of making fun of Eddy and being cruel in that special way that only high schoolers can be cruel in, right? Brick is able to intercept that, so Eddy never finds out about that, and this gives Eddy a chance to actually really open up about what he saw at Quentin's house to all the Rangers in private, after lunch. And it's just a way in which Brick is able to look out for Eddy. But also, Brick just maybe getting to see the underbelly still of even though he makes good decisions in school, not everyone does. Um, a very cute short vignette happens too of Brick moonwalking out of the cafeteria after asking Jane for homecoming. Cecily is going to go stag to homecoming. Uh, and also, everyone gets to go to homecoming because Principal Kaplan has given everyone jobs. So there's some changes that come because normally Principal Kaplan wouldn't be giving jobs to students at homecoming. There'd be parental chaperones, which there still are. But this means that everyone's going to have a reason to be at homecoming besides just being at the dance. So, like, Jane gets to be on the setup committee, Cecily will be taking pictures. Uh, all the jocks, including Brick, have shifts watching the punch bowl so nobody spikes it. And Eddy is going to be outdoors with people like Bulk doing security. But this is all to make much work, to make little work with many hands, of course. And in theory, it's a good idea because the dance is also, again, no longer at the Angel Grove Greens. For safety, it's now going to be in the gymnasium of the building of Angel Grove High, kind of like the Rydell High um, prom homecoming in Greece. I don't know if it's ever stated whether it's outright prom or homecoming in the film. So what does this all mean? What is it all leading up to now that I've told you a little bit about kind of the whys of how things are happening? Well, the idea is that everything sort of proceeds normally that entire week and the entire next week leading up to homecoming. Every now and then they will see something racing down the street, but it's doesn't seem to hurt anyone, and it doesn't seem any different really than the encroaching living smoke, which again, I'm not mentioning in this episode, but it does become thick at this point, and people have been disappearing. Like they said, there's memorial board even in the cafeteria at school. It's so noticeable. People can't escape it anymore. You can't look away from it. But inside, even that, we have these super sweet moments. Brick and his dad has a moment where Brick's dad pays for a town car for him and Jane to get chauffeured to the homecoming dance. They have this great discussion about how Brick is growing and changing, and it is awkward. And they do that awkward pat on the back hug at the bottom, and Dad gives him like $300 to have a nice meal afterwards. Um, it's a really sweet moment and gesture, and we only see it from Brick's point of view, um, because Brick is the one that we're following for this. He's really excited to, meet Jane and go to this dance. Unfortunately, life always has other plans. So some of this is from a transcript, and I want to try to not lose too much of it. So there's a good chance that I will end up pausing every now and then. But from the outside, the vehicle Brick gets into looks just like a town car. Normal black rental limo town car, not stretched, not too fancy, just fancy enough. Um, there's no plate glass, it's just like a driver, front seat, and then Brick in the back seat. Uh, Brick rolls an alertness for me and gets an 18. It's at that point, about 20 minutes in the drive, that Brick realizes that it's taking a long time to get wherever they're going. It shouldn't take that long, even in Angel Grove. And there's just red streaks of lightning that are following alongside the car. And he can't see any marks outside the car, any of the passing landmarks. He's going too fast. Everything is blurry. Everything sort of feels and looks like a Gran Turismo video game, but from like inside the vehicle. And the driver, who he has not really seen a face of until now, because no one opened the door for him to get in, transforms into Lord Zedd. And Zedd is here on a mission. Brick prepares essentially to fight Zedd, but Zedd just sort of starts to laugh when Brick fires off the first shot. I call it trying to Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Archduke Lord Zedd Ferdinand. Um, and Zedd just laughs at kind of the first attempt, about even the preparation of the first attempt. And he asks, did you think I was going to make it that easy for you, Carrion? Did you think Zordon, the fishbowl guy, was going to make sure you were safe all the time? He makes a quotation as Brick responds about the idea of the Pink Ranger being surprised to see him. And that's kind of when the mask drops. I mean, it has to drop at that point. Zud knows who you are. You're trapped in a car with him. And then comes the time for the devil's bargain as Zed gets to the reasoning for him being there. And he says, Mr. Kerrigan, we don't have to be enemies. You think we have to be enemies, but we don't. In reality, I'm much more powerful than Zordon. The reason I'm here with you right now is that the anger inside of you is palpable. I can feel it. You would make an interesting general with your capacity to feel anger and love. And though Brick responds with some sentiment about betrayal, Lord Zed feels ready for the sentiment. And he asks, you would never betray a person you would walk out on in anger? Are you so sure Zordon can lead you to victory, Pink Ranger? Aren't you worried about his inability to know things? Aren't you angry at Zordon? Aren't you a little scared for Jane, Cecily, Eddy, Quentin? I'm sorry, the Dark Ranger. You've met him. And Zed takes a second to gloat as Brick is trying to gather more information. Of course I was behind Quentin's transformation. Do you think anyone else is as evil as me? Come on, Mr. Kerrigan. Let's not be children about this. It's revealed that Zed just wants to meet with Brick. This isn't an attack. This is an offer. If Brick is willing to listen. If his blind patriotism towards Zordon hasn't clouded his judgment. And when Brick says he would never betray Zordon, even with all the impatience he's had, Zed isn't so sure. He says, everyone has a price, but whether or not you join me, this is a one-time offer, how would you like to talk to Quentin in person? I know you know about the caves. How would you like to go there? And of course, Brick is incredulous, but it is a genuine offer. They have a little bit of a back and forth about what Finster has called the caves of Zed. And Zed teases Brick a little bit because for some reason Zed knows about what happened to Brick when he got his power up, and he knows about Babu, the spider person that was in the North Cave Shadow Zone area where Brick found his bow, but almost lost his life. And Zed eventually talks about how dramatic everyone is, and that not everyone sees the caves of Zed as a cave. He talks about how much Rita has told him, about how much Rita had known that Brick almost lost his head in that cave from Babu, the spider creature. And Zed mocks him and says, you don't have very good luck in caves, do you, Pink Ranger? Brick responds about his friends and about what they're going to do, how they're going to win. And Zed responds, oh, yes, with the help of your friend and your powerful mentor, Zordon of Eltar. And he gags a little bit. You know that planet doesn't exist anymore, right? Eltar? Oh, yes, thanks to me. Yes, I'm always the bad guy. You know what? I've been studying this planet. You all are no better than me, and the smoke proves it. All the people that have disappeared, all the people that have given themselves to the smoke, given over to their anger and their hatred, that's what the smoke does. And it doesn't have to do much because it's inside of all of you. And you don't even know how far you're doomed. That's the greatest trick of all. This is your last chance, Mr. Kerrigan. I won't be so polite next time. I think you have a lot of potential inside of you with all that anger. And if I can offer Quentin everything he's ever wanted, I can give you exactly what you want to. I guess I should call him Mr. Turner, shouldn't I? I shouldn't be so informal with one of my generals, one of your former colleagues. Zed laughs and makes a baseball metaphor, and Brick talks about the idea of granting wishes, but Zed retorts, I may not be able to grant wishes, but I can make promises I can keep. I was able to give Mr. Turner everything he wanted, and all he had to do was join me. Didn't even hurt. After a while. And of course, I butt in as the GM to remind you that we do know what happened to Quentin, more or less. You saw some of it in Power Rangers Centurion when Leigh Mackenzie had a Yellow Ranger flashback where she saw what happened to Quentin after she got the corrupted coin that currently Eddy has in his possession. And that will become important too in just a moment. Back to the story. So Brick and Zed banter, and then Zed is still talking about the smoke, still talking about what he's done to Angel Grove and what he's planning on doing with the rest of the world, potentially, if not already has. He says everything is here, all the good and the bad, the light and the shadow. After all, who is Zordon without his Zed or Rita or my friend Divatox, whose fabulous turbo technology is what's keeping us locked in a time implementation, just like what Zordon experiences. Of course, I'd be a little insane too if I was trapped in a time bubble forever. I reiterate that Zed does not consider this a trap. He considers this a discussion where you just happen to be trapped in a time bubble together. And here's where I reference one of Zed's mechanics, because Zed is not a member of the core rulebook of villains, but he was added in, or I cobbled him together from a couple of different villains, but I believe he was added into one of the later books. I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure. And Zed has something called extreme arrogance, and you can actually outroll him on social, um, gaining an edge. And for a brick, it would be gaining an edge on targeting, um, and using trickery against him. Zed does make a point here, though, because he seems to know a lot about Brick. And he says, I think the funniest part of this all is how little respect you Rangers have for Zordon, and yet you cling to him so. Quentin was telling me something about how you call the most brilliant mind from Eltar a fish in a tank. You liken him to a little aquatic creature. That's marvelous. I don't think I could come up with something so evil myself. He was so well respected when his planet existed, of course. I mean, he was always a scientist, but he was always careless, reckless with science. Science before all made him a great scientist, but I don't know if that made him a great humanoid. But then you're about as annoyed with him as I am these days, from what I've observed. And Zed goes on to cut Zordon up. He talks about sending five teenagers into battle and how it doesn't seem very heroic, about how Zordon has always been a thorn in his side, but that also Rick doesn't really seem as interested in the deal that he made as much as Quentin does. He makes it sound very much like Quentin took the deal nearly right away. And he confesses even that Quentin, Mr. Turner, did need something from him. He accuses Brick. He says, "You think you have everything figured out. You think it's all airtight, but it's not airtight as Brick thinks." And he does grow weary of Brick's protestations. The world slows down as Zed does park. And it's here where Brick actually does get a shot off on Zed. Not enough to do any real damage because Zed has a lot of hit points since he is one of the major villains of the whole series, including even the newest season, Cosmic Fury. And Zed disappears, leaving Brick at the entrance to Area 52 all alone. And I gave Brick about a 10-second countdown to get himself out of there. This is the public front gate of Area 52. And before Zed departs, he says, "You said you wanted to come to where Quentin is and talk to him. You said you wanted to see my caves. Welcome." After the targeting roll, after the acrobatics roll, he gets in touch with Alpha on his wrist communicator, and Brick is able to teleport to the command center. There's so many things going on in his mind. He's thinking about how he's essentially stood up Jane if time is moving regular again. And he thinks about um, Cecily and how heroic she is, and Eddy and how much friendship there is with Quentin. And he's kind of babbling about Jane and babbling about Quentin. And Cecily and Jane are able to teleport to the command center, but Eddy does not. They realize the viewing globe is that Zed has borrowed this turbo technology and has used it to speed up the car, but has also used it in the front of the homecoming dance to essentially um, do a time stop for all of the students approaching. And that, unfortunately, includes Eddy, who had one of the first shifts um, as a bouncer outside with Bulk. And so in the viewing globe, they actually get to see Zed approaching, and Zed is looking for something. He's kind of descended, teleported in on his own with his, you can't really call them putties, but it's not Tengas. He has some thugs with him, but it's mostly him. The thugs are sort of for decoration. Scorpina's not there, obviously, but neither is Goldar. But he's not so concerned with attacking or taking the students anywhere. He's very methodically making sure he can see into all of their faces, all their frozen faces, as though he's looking for someone or something. Something Zed can't see, because what he's looking for is Eddy. What he can't see is that Eddy has kind of a golden claw in his back, and the rest of the Rangers can see this. And that claw is basically keeping Eddy as frozen as everyone else, but it's keeping him from being seen by Zed. It's essentially keeping him safe in this weird time stoppage, this abuse of technology on two fronts. Um, they all morphs. Uh, Jane takes along the Song of the Savannah. Cecily goes with the chain sword of the Fire Eagle, and Brick decides to go with the Elephant of Sincerity and Faith. And he once again goes for the axes with the science ability. Um, Zordon does have parting words. He says, "I believe in you, Rangers. This may be your hardest test yet. I believe in the strength residing in each of you." Now, what he says to Alpha after they teleport, the Rangers, he said, "I've worked to combat the signals Zed is using, and all the people that were frozen, he's monitoring their heartbeats now to make sure they're safe. And as I have them descend, as I have initiative called, Zed is delighted to see them and that he gets to finally meet the thorns in my side." Now, bear in mind, this is the first time that these Rangers have actually seen Zed. He has preceded himself, and now he showed himself to Brick, and he, of course, acknowledges Brick, and he says, "Hello, Pink Ranger. Couldn't keep away, could you?" Um, what's interesting is this battlefield is not as tricky as the one from the North Cave, where Scorpina made her putties, her green putties. Because I let them know, and I was pretty explicit about this, is that the people that were frozen um, were pretty safe from damage in the way that Zordon was keeping them safe. And so the real issue here was Zed, and the context is finding Eddy. I don't think I ever necessarily mentioned it until after the battle, but the context is Eddy is being kept hidden safe by um, what I call the cursed coin, which is the cursed coin that Leia will eventually get via Golda. But this curse coin is basically keeping Eddy hidden because there's still enough of it in the light that it is able to do its job, essentially. But that does mean that Eddy is sort of helpless in this and that he can't help his friends, and all he can do is sort of watch and hope to survive. Um, there's a lot of lending assistance here for a couple of reasons. The first is that Cecily gets addressed by Zedd as the girl who murders putties. And he addresses Jane and mocks her use of the Song of the Savannah, tells her she's using an old spell, but that he has a great honor in meeting her, a coward that won't actually attack an enemy. Um, Zedd has a crushing fist attack that slams into the earth and makes incredibly dangerous terrain. But that is not what makes Zedd dangerous in this big battle, which in any other season would have probably been the finale, but which has been set in motion is much bigger than even Zedd himself, and not even Zedd realizes what he's done yet. He's trying to get into Cecily's head, wanting her to let the darkness in, seemingly knowing what has been happening with her ever since Half Halloween, with how she's been seeing herself as Rita, and how there are some parts of Rita that do sort of live in her. It shakes her confidence, and throughout most of the battle, she cannot seem to get hit off on him. Um, Zed evades Brick's thunderous cicada, his beloved golden scarab shield. He says she's an unworthy general, but he would take what he could get. He calls her a murderer again. He tells her they were people once. Do you know that, right? And I get asked if I'm going full Queen Barrel at this point, and I go, yes, I'm going full Queen Barrel at this point, which is exactly what this battle was. He calls Jane a coward and aims red lightning from his staff at her, and she does take a couple points of damage. And she says, your friend, the Pink Ranger, would be a much better general than you could ever be. And here's where Brick is able um, to be affected, not by Zed, but by Eddy. Because you see, the good thing about having two sources of power coin on you, one keeping you safe and one within you, is that you can actually affect gameplay at my table. Because even though Eddy can't strike physically, Eddy is a Black Ranger, and Black Rangers are boons to their team. They are known for cracking wise. They are known, for being dancers, sometimes jesters a little bit, if you pardon the pun. But as much as Zed is trying to really put the team off balance and sow doubt in their hearts, Eddy can remind them using some kind of short-term telekinetic magic from his coin, the way the power crystals work and connect the Rangers together no matter where they are. And he reminds them in his heart of how good they are and how lucky he is to have them. And even though they're having a tough time physically, and even though the Dark Warriors appear once they actually start getting hits on Zed, Eddie is able to remind the trio of what they mean, so they're each able to get hit on Zed. One sends Zed flying prone, one hits Zed with arrows, and one is able to actually get a slice into his arm. Um, the Dark Warriors, the green putties that Scorpina created, Jane kind of figures out they are not actually all that loyal to Zed, but that they don't really seem to have a mind to be interacted with much anymore. And she tries, but it's very much like she has to deal with it. And the battle is kind of ramping up, and it seems like it's going to start taking a long time. But there's a voice from the heavens and a giant submarine in the sky that peals out a voice and says, Zed, where is my technology? You don't steal from other people, at least not me. And there's a very powerful wind, and Zed sort of laughs and he disappears. And time begins to return to normal, and people begin unfreezing very slowly. Eddy is got taken out of there because unmorphed the power of the morphin grid spectrum he's not necessarily aligned with have taken a toll on his body, so he needs to be evacuated. He needs to get in the med chair. In the other season, this would have been the finale. The finale would have been the dance, but the dance is canceled. Let's be real. And all of those things that he's saying, all that doubt, is really, it didn't work, but it also sort of proclaims the thing that he's trying to do. It's very obvious what he's trying to do. And for anyone else, it might have succeeded on. But there's enough to worry about. Now, Jane, who has been hearing Quentin's music in her helmet for most of the season after his disappearance, has a little bit of an epilogue and then has the start of the finale opening. Because at some point next week, as they are planning to go visit the caves of Zedd, Jane sees Quentin in her kitchen, but she sees him crying out in agony, and she sees him in the same outfit that she saw him in last, not wearing the Dark Ranger armor and vulnerable, but then he disappears in the blink of an eye, and she's left stunned and I would think a little heartbroken. And then it begins. It's the finale. It's episode 13, fittingly enough. Rick and Eddy both physically are not impaired, but their bodies are just very aware of what it means to be a ranger. In a way, they're parallel in that Eddy is feeling what Rick felt when he was warped to the wandering light and came back. And there's a lot of healing you have to do when you take untempered morphin schism that isn't necessarily meant for you, even though it's parallel of you. But the first person, and this all kind of happens at the same time. And so the four characters actually can't talk to each other. The four Rangers can't actually talk to each other and meet until these four singular instances happen. They're overlapping in time. This is part of the TTRPG issue, right? Is that when you have things happening all at once, you can show it in a montage, but at this current moment in time, everyone has to go in order. So we start with Jane. And Jane is alone at home. She wakes up and she can see physically how much of the living smoke is now in the house. And it's causing her to cough. And Jane goes downstairs, and there's no one there. No one at all. All she's left with is her thoughts, which wouldn't seem so bad if she didn't hear the crowd in the far distance. Eddy goes downstairs, and he tries engaging with the people he lives with, his foster family, for lack of better terminology. And they don't notice that he's there, almost like he's a ghost in his own house. He asks about breakfast, and they're having a conversation about grocery shopping, like you can't see the living smoke. He asks how they are, they don't respond, and then he hears the sound of the crowd. And as he's hearing the sound of the crowd, there is a knocking at Jane's door. And at the door is Latour in a gas mask. And Latour gives Jane not the gas mask, but he gives her something. He gives her a chariot tarot card, and he says when she needs this, this will light her way. He also apologizes, but he says, I can't go with you. I can only give you a gift, and that he's running from the city, from whatever this is, because he can feel it, and he can feel that it is now or never. and he can feel the mob and exactly what they're doing. And Jane takes this card and doesn't know what quite to do with it, but trusts that she'll figure it out. And in a way, Eddy and Jane are both left alone, which might be easier than what happens to Cecily. Cecily gets up to the sound of pounding hammers, and when she comes downstairs, her father and mother are boarding up all of the doors and windows. And she tries to talk them out of it, but her parents are so crazed and afraid, and the fog is so thick, the smoke is so thick in her home that she's coughing it up. And the parents start coughing up a little bit of black ash, and her father grabs onto her. He's crazed and he talks to her about fear. He talks to her about being safe. And she has to wrench out of his grasp and she has to climb out of a bathroom window to leave the house of her parents. And Brick wakes up to the sound of fighting, not of the growing mob, which is not really a mob, it's more of a protest, but kind of a mob vibe, if you will, of all the people that are remaining in town that have not disappeared as it is. And this mob will be Bulk, but not Skull, or Skull, but not necessarily where Bulk is. But first, Brick and the shouting. Brick's parents are talking about him like he's not there. And they have broken in to the trophy case in their den. And even though they are getting slashed by the glass after they broke into it, they're reaching in for trophies and throwing them at each other so much that Brick has to sort of tie them up with some rope that he has handy. But they still yell, and they're yelling about him. They're yelling about how Jane has changed him, about how they don't know who he is anymore. And it's kind of that very deep, wounded fight of who are you? And that's when Brick hears the mob. So, in this mob, of which Bulk is actually leading it, there are signs. And Jane and Brick are going to meet up at the back, and Cecily and Eddy are going to meet up towards the front of the pack. They will eventually come together to do what they need to do. And it won't be difficult to do because even though Angel Grove is such a big city, so many people have been taken that this protest, this mob, feels smaller than Angel Grove has ever felt. And the smoke seems to know where everyone is going because it creates sort of this like wall hallway for them to go down. It parts a little bit like a dammed version of the Red Sea. And Eddy gets to hear from Bulk, who says that he's tired of just letting things happen, and that if the Rangers can't do anything about it, they're going to go to Area 52 and they're going to get the military to do something because they can't live like this anymore. Bulk is stirred to passion in a way that's constructive instead of destructive, and Eddy doesn't um, let that flame die any, but he also wants to make sure that when Bulk does it, that Bulk in leading this is doing it because Bulk actually cares. And it took a while. It took for Bulk's own mother to disappear, which is what happened at this morning for this to happen. But he can see who Bulk is and how much Bulk cares about everything. And so Cecily is able to catch up with Eddy. And it takes no time at all and also much too long to get to the gates of Area 52. Now, as far as Quentin, who has been labeled the Dark Ranger at this point, He's having a marvelous day. Zedd has given him some instructions to do. He doesn't know exactly what it all entails, but he knows sort of what's coming. There's a pithy offhand comment where I'm like, hey, so don't worry about the fact that everything you've eaten since you become the Dark Ranger has tasted like sand. It's probably very normal. Um, and we just both kind of chuckle about that because we obviously know it's not. Um, but at the gates of Area 52, where the protest stops, everything seems to stop for a moment, long enough for Brick and Jane to kind of get up ahead. They can hear the people shouting, see the signs about, wanting help, wanting to do something. And then said, let's forth with these lightning bolts, but not in order to hit anyone. It does blind people to like have to turn away from the entrance, but the red lightning strikes just at the very entrance, and so it's creating a gate that only the Power Rangers can pass through. And no one's fooling themselves. Everyone sort of knows what's going on. I always call the Power Ranger thing the worst kept secret in Angel Grove or wherever it's at, because generally speaking, it's not hard to figure out who is a Power Ranger and who is not, honestly. Um, but I leave this sort of like binding red lightning so that the four of them, the four Rangers, can transform and pass through that gate. There's an earthquake moment afterwards where there's a giant chasm left between the two, but there's also an open door into darkness, which is supposed to be this front gate welcoming area of Area 52, but is completely empty of anything save for a track in the center of the floor. And you wouldn't even know it was an American military um, installation because there's not even a flag of any kind. And this was the first thing Quentin was in charge of. And the first thing Quentin was in charge of is a soapbox derby car, a giant one, of course, and one that could knock the Rangers down, that could actually do some damage, and looks very much like the car that was transformed and took him. Um, Eddy, it doesn't take long for Eddy, especially to deal with that car. He basically punches the car into nothingness. It doesn't even really take a full turn of combat to do it because there's so many feelings there. And they don't know Quentin's behind it. Quentin is like in a paneled separate room, sort of like the Devil's in the Detail way. Um, and if you haven't watched that segment yet, um, from the Shadows of Nox, from that from that playlist, Devil in the Details is how Zedd got to Earth, actually, during the Angel Grove Carnival, back when they found Tor, the egg that would be Tor. So they defeat the first monster. They don't really have signal to Alpha, but they don't expect to have signal to Alpha or Zordon. They sort of know. Everyone just sort of knows. There's a finale here. But what is going to happen during the finale? It's really good if it's like Eddy just punching a car and there goes the first villain, the first toy, as Quentin puts it, Mr. Turner, the Dark Ranger. The second is a long hallway, and it's only here at the front of the long hallway at the back of the front entrance room of Area 52 where Jane realizes where she is. And she sees a very distinct cutout that becomes a very distinct looking window. And it takes a second for it to sit in. But Jane knows exactly where she is. And she doesn't want to say it. And but I kind of force her to say it because this is the hallway outside of that round room where they'd been before, where they'd had to destroy that satellite dish, where they'd lost Brick the first time. And I don't remember who said it exactly, but one of them says, hey, we'll all go together if something happens like that again, which is fitting because as that sentiment is exclaimed, as they start going down the crazy dark hallway, and they can sort of hear Zedd over the intercom, they know the Dark Ranger is probably somewhere. Um, the two warrior green putties that Scorpina created, even though she is no more, reach out with a chain with that mace star attached to it and grab on to Brick and start pulling him toward the shadows quickly. Eddy goes after the chain to cut the chain away, and Cecily realizes shortly after Eddy cuts the chain away that it's not a chain, but it was part of these Dark Warrior bodies. And it's not quite bleeding. Something is coming out of it, but it's not blood. And there's a horrifying realization that these two people that signed themselves over to Scorpina are sort of not human anymore, and any damage inflicted on them, which they will have to do because they have katanas and they have weapons of their own and they have their anger. They're not really people anymore. They do try to save them. They try really hard, but they resist. The Dark Warriors aren't human enough to be turned human again. They use the power of the Sentinels to kind of separate one from their body, the one wielding the katana, but there's not enough person there to be a person anymore, and the person just dissolves into goo. And in the middle of that goo is a pair of naval dog tags. And the other one, the one whose chain arm thing had been cut off, just sort of dissolves in the floor, leaving nothing but silence, not even crying out in pain, nothing but emptiness, nothing but nothing. And it's here where all the Rangers have figured out where they are, not just because Jane said something, but because they can see into the room. And the hallway, as an indignity, kind of flips so they all have to sort of enter the room in a less offensive posture and more defensive. And it's the round room again. And it looks kind of the same from the last time they were there. Uh, the satellite that they apparently cracked in half, which is apparently what exactly happened the first time they were there. Um, with Brick's sacrifice, the two halves are still there. And all of the computers are still there. There's no secondary room to go into anymore. The NASA style computer room is just wall, and it's this wall of organic and metallic. It very much looks like Zed himself, but there's no throne here. There's no space to go to that isn't this round room. It's just this round room that represents Zed. And as they enter the room, the door closes behind them, and a countdown timer starts. And Zed comes on through a TV and laughs and says, "This is it." He says it much more dramatically than I'm going to say it, of course. But he lets them know that the satellite dish made by man to get rid of Rita is still going to serve a purpose because he hasn't been able to get the living smoke out of Angel Grove quite yet. It hasn't been quite strong enough. But once it's absorbed the Ranger powers and the Sentinels, it's going to go through these broken satellite piece to all the other satellites, dishes, and all the other military bases around the world. And it's going to eat the world from the inside out, leaving him in charge and leaving only the worst of their worst and the desires of their heart. And he's not even there. And then he is there. He decides to come after the Rangers. He comes down to gloat and to give them, one last fight, but he leaves the timer on. And he does battle with them. He ends up encasing Eddy in this ball of earth after Eddy tries to show him what he can do with the axes and nearly getting hit off. And the Rangers kind of rally around Eddy before the Dark Ranger is called forth by Zedd. As the timer goes down, Zedd instructs the Dark Ranger to figure out which Power Ranger he wants to see join him. And Quentin gets to make a choice that I did not tell Quentin he was going to make, but Quentin, who has bent the knee to Zedd and given him a power coin, Quentin, who is trapped in Dark Ranger armor without a way to escape it, ends up going down his a line of his friends that are being held by these weird dark amalgamation putties that don't look like any putty the Rangers have ever seen. They look like they were quickly cobbled together from pieces of putties left undone. Quentin goes down the line. Jane, Brick, Eddy, Cecily. Brick pleads to Quentin to take him instead, but Quentin settles on taking Jane, taking her away and brainwashing her. Whatever happened to Quentin, the implication is that's going to happen to Jane. But whatever's supposed to happen doesn't happen. Because you see, Zedd is overloading the system, and the living smoke is going to go out. And the only way it can use a ranger power is for it to absorb something that is just in the room. So as Zedd strips Quentin of his dark armor and leaves him vulnerable on the floor, he says, I don't need Traitor either, and neither does Zordon. And he teleports out of the room and he lets the weird amalgamation abomination putties dissolve into nothing. There's a moment during the battle that I've forgotten because this is the important part. There's a moment in the battle that I've forgotten where Rita does try to come in and feed him a love potion. And he has this iconic line about, well, you have to have a heart for a love potion to work. So Rita has also come and gone. The point of it was not to fight Zedd. That was the point of the battle before the homecoming dance. The point of this was to be trapped, was for the Rangers' doom to happen, was for them to feel the room filling with this living smoke, feeding on their darkest fears and desires, watching it probably tear Quentin apart since he doesn't even have a Ranger form at this point because his coin is corrupted. So what could he do? What's interesting is that the Sentinel powers don't seem to even be on Zedd's radar. So when the Song of the Savannah marble and box are given to Quentin, the question is, will it be enough? And it is, because there's still goodness in him. He talks a little bit about, he asks, as he's coming out of the actual pain of being ripped from all of the Darth Vaderness that was upon his body. He asks about his dad, and he finds out that it was all a lie from Eddy, but Eddy stays with him, gives him a granola bar, the first meal he's had since he was whisked away the first week, the first monster that Zedd had created, that had come out of everything. And the four of them are in this room again, just like they were. Not that long ago, really, if you're honest about it, if we're looking at how real time works, maybe 3, 4 months ago. But this time, there's no computer to overload. Zed has seemed to set everything up, and there doesn't seem to be a way out. It just seems to be a way to be destroyed. Um, that's when I have them do an alertness roll. And one of them, and then all of them, see the little marble-sized holes that are in the half crack of the satellite dish. And these little marble-sized holes are what these sentinels were made for. Get out of the way of the red one. And it came to pass that in this great poem in Saint Honoré about light and darkness, that you have to make a really big light to fight a lot of darkness. And the only thing to do is to trust. It's sort of like when they went through in episode 9, I believe it was, when they went through all of that hate tornado fog that Zedd had created. And they had to trust that just walking through it and have faith. And so they decide to have faith. They put the Sentinels into the place where they were and they leave themselves vulnerable. The five of them together in this room. There doesn't seem to be an escape. There doesn't seem to be a way to teleport out. No power weapons. No friends, nothing but each other. I ended with the countdown. 10, 9, 8. The clock goes down. Eddy keeping watch over Quentin. Jane and Brick getting to have a short dance that they never got at their homecoming. I have this vision at the end of the season that they kind of grabbed hands to face what was ever coming next. Because I told them there would be a season 3. And the title of season 3, though ominous, was not what they expected. And that's where I'm going to end this, and with the explosion and the fire and the heat and the turning of your face away and the closing of your eyes, not knowing what's coming next, but knowing you're not alone and experiencing it. And I just let you know, season 3 of my Power Ranger podcast saga is called Corrupted. All bets are off. Anything is possible. And with the destruction of the Sentinels, now Angel Grove needs the Rangers more than ever. But what does it mean? And how has it affected the universe? Well, keep tuning in for Power Rangers Rise. Keep tuning in for Power Rangers Centurion, if we end up making new episodes of that. And stay tuned in because in the new year, in 2026, I'll be doing recaps unveiling exactly what happened because of the Ranger sacrifice and how it changed the course of Angel Grove. And in fact, the entire universe in ways that they could not possibly comprehend. So that was Sentinels' senior year. I hope it was worth sticking around for. I hope you had a good time listening in, and I hope that you've seen some of those plot strands from other games come into this, because this is a big story about a whole universe and about how being true to yourself and letting your light shine can actually save the world. This has been Sentinel's senior year. I'm your GM, John McDonald, otherwise known as Panabon sometimes. To my Rangers, to Jane and Eddy, to Cecily, to Brick, to Quentin, and to Luna, I say thank you for a tremendous second year in this podcast. And I can't wait for everyone to find out what happens next. We'll see you soon. May the power protect you.